The secret of the varied forms in ants is by no means explained. We do not know how it happens, or what causes it. Why it happened, that is easier to understand. The polymorphism of the females has given the ant people extraordinary advantages. It makes the division of labor highly practicable, which is important for creatures living socially. The how and what no one can say. If I try to realize the complete representation of the process, I am certain there is no explanation. The individual creature means nothing among the ant people. The whole is everything. Whatever aids the whole is beneficial. That which hurts all is bad. In the case of no other creature, not even man, are the young so carefully guarded and reared as among the ants. Nevertheless, the single egg and the single larva are nothing. Both are quietly eaten up or are used for feeding others, if necessary. Nowhere else in nature do we find child labor save among men and ants. The state is all in all to the ants. The proper division of labor is of the highest importance for the state's welfare. For this reason, popular thought demands division of labor, demands it so insistently that it is not content to assign one labor to one individual, another labor to another similar individual, but has produced a special type best adapted for specific tasks. From earliest infancy, this division of labor is fixed. The egg, which is eaten by the adults or the larvae used for feeding others, has attained its purpose for the whole. The larvae of the spinners serve as tools, and this is a unique instance in nature, except for man, where a creature regularly serves as the means of producing material. The young ants just hatched, still very soft, whose chitin shield has not yet hardened, help in nursery work. But the real division of labor begins only with the adults. This may be observed easily in an artificial nest. All you need to do is tint the ants with different colors and watch the individual labor. Some individuals do nothing but bring in food, and others serve as guards and defenders. Yes, I have proved that the work of cleaning up, removing debris from the nest, throwing it on the trash heap, grave digging, carrying the dead to the cemetery, and nursing the sick is assigned to special individuals. If the division of labor is of great value to the state among similar individuals, how much more valuable must it be to produce special types adapted particularly for special labor? Thus, the aim and will for multiformity among the ant people became vital to each ant. The popular thought demanded multiformity and attained it, though the secret of how it was brought about is not yet unveiled to men. The work of reproduction was entrusted to both sexes, while a biform of one, the feminine, formed the special caste, which may be termed neutral, sexless, at least so far as concerns reproduction as a rule. They thought the ant people were working towards a renunciation of male cooperation. They desired an Amazon state, a purely feminine state. The males served only for the brief marriage, and what was essential for that was given to them. They needed very good eyes to find the female outside of the nest easily, but no brain was needed for this wedding. Good sexual parts were enough. The working ants, however, acquired a brain. They were not needed for reproduction, and so all their powers were reserved for labor, for the benefit of the state. And because individual ants, once upon a time all alike, were destined to perform special work, over time the popular will developed a special type, best adapted to these different pursuits. These shapes were not all fixed. They arose in millions of years and disappeared as the wheel of the state required. It seems as if the spirit of the people was always making experiments, making an entire series of shapes, to ascertain which finally would prove best adapted to their aims. In some species, we find giant and tiny workers, and between the two a dozen different sizes. In the narrow-breasted, we can find a dozen different shapes, forming a chain from the queen to the workers. The best adapted persist, and the poorest shapes disappear. Even the caste of the workers may disappear altogether when they are no longer required for the benefit of the state. This is the case with the workerless ants, which live as parasites among other ants. As these other ants feed them and do all the work for them, they find no necessity for workers of their own. Chapter 3. How Ants Live and Work. The ants are the cleanest creatures of all clean people. The American woman of the cultured class is almost painfully particular as to cleanliness, but she thinks nothing of dragging the filth of the street into her home on her dirty shoes, which sends a shiver through the Japanese, who take it for granted that they must remove their shoes at the door and put on sandals before entering the house. I know how many women of Holland pride themselves upon the absolute cleanliness of their homes, hating a bit of dust, even on the ceiling, though they are rather shy of using water upon their own bodies. But all the cleanliness of the Japanese, the Dutch or Americans is as nothing to that among the ants. Cleansing tools are necessary, and the ant has these to the highest perfection. On the front legs are a comb and brush, with which it cleanses its feelers. The comb and brush in turn are cleansed by passing the legs through the mandibles of the upper jaw. The ant assumes the most comical postures in making itself perfectly clean, for every speck must be removed from its body. If the dirty spot cannot be reached with the brush, the ant scrapes off the dirt by rubbing back or belly on some hard surface. After the dirt has been brushed off, the licking process follows, a real washing, cat fashion. The spittle is rather oily, so the ant also anoints itself in this way. As in all other endeavors, the ants help one another in this cleansing process, in which they give up most of their leisure time to their common enjoyment. They seem to take special delight in continually polishing out the queen and the young brood. As important as personal cleanliness is to ants, the spotlessness of their homes seems to be quite as urgent. Examine the dusty, dirty wasp nest, and then examine an ant nest. What a difference! All debris must be taken out at once. They have special dumps, sometimes in a far corner of the nest, but usually outside of it. If anything is brought into the nest that cannot be utilized, it is buried then and there. Even more remarkable, the ants bury their dead. It is delicious to note how the exponents of exact science state so solemnly, in the presence of this fact, which they cannot very well deny, that the ants bury their dead indeed, but only because of their desire for cleanliness. It is as if human society had any other reason for the same ceremony. Dead bodies would be a plague in human habitations quite as much as in ant nests, and for that reason, they must be taken away. If this were not the case, mankind would probably keep the dear departed in their homes, and the ants might do the same. Many animals devour their dead ancestors at once. Why don't the ants follow this custom? Inasmuch as they devour other insects and even the ants belonging to enemy nests, it cannot be denied that ants manifest a certain kind of feeling when their relatives die. Some species simply take their dead out of the nest, while others bury them. The assumption that the ants have no feeling for their dead is quite as difficult to prove as the opposite, that they mourn for them, but the latter seems to me more probable. Why should the ants not feel for the dead when they manifest sympathy for the ill? It is true, of course, that a sick ant lying by an ant road will be passed by dozens of her sisters without the least compunction. They act as though they did not see the sick ant, giving her a wide berth. Is this any different from the actions of human beings? Why should we tell the story of the Good Samaritan today in our schools? How many men help a poor man in need or illness? 1 out of 1,000. The rest act just as the ants do, behaving as if they did not see the sufferer, going by with their heads full of their own affairs and troubles. Occasionally one stops to help a Good Samaritan ant, and this one is an expert in caring for the sick. I have often observed wounded or ill ants nursed back to health by their sisters. These ministrations may last for months. It is true that very severely wounded individuals are seldom nursed. Those whose death is imminent are cast out of the nest, just like the Spartans exposed their sickly or crippled children on rocky Taygetus. It seems to me more humane to give over the hopelessly ill or incurably insane to speedy death, rather than to prolong the agony of their lives as much as possible, as we men do. It is a much sounder sentiment for the general good of the people. Fresh air is one of the chief essentials of nursing the ill. The ants know this truth better than all the other animals, even better than most men. Their nests are pierced in every direction by ventilating shafts, looking for perfect ventilation. If cleanliness is one of the great essentials for health, the exercise of the body is hardly less important. The ants, accustomed to physical labor from early youth, have certainly developed the greatest possible power of their bodies, raising their strength to its highest point. In proportion to their size, it is far greater than that of mankind. The ants also indulge in sports and games, just as we do. They play with grains of wheat or seeds, like cats, taking them away from one another, letting them roll, and bringing them back. Or they have boxing matches and wrestling matches, throwing one another, catching one another with their mandibles, trying all kinds of grips, a regular catch as catch can bout. It is easy to see that these contests are not in earnest. There are crowds of onlookers, stroking the contestants with their feelers and forelegs and trilling as they cheer. The ants do not hurt one another, never using their poison weapons. That is nothing else than following the rules and not using barred grips. Very seldom does the friendly bout become bloody, as sometimes happens when peasants have their matches and lose their tempers, turning the harmless contest into a bloody battle. These games of strength, according to my observations, are usually carried on by the ants engaged in housework, which is easier and less straining than hunting or working outside of the nest. It seems as if these workers shut up at domestic labor take this method of gaining exercise out in the open air and sunshine. I have also observed that the workers engaged in work outside of the nest sometimes indulge in sports. I noticed, especially among the Texan harvest ants, that one worker caught hold of the worker ahead of him with his mandibles and held on. Then sometimes a third took hold of the second, and in this way, they formed a marching procession. The ants carry not only the ill or wounded, or eggs, larvae, and pups. Often they pick up and bear away adult and perfectly sound sisters. This may be observed when they change their habitation, which happens quite frequently. Some species have special summer nests and winter nests, moving from one to the other, and other species move to another home when the one they occupy suits them no longer, either because it is too damp or too dry, too far from the food supply, or too near some enemy people. There are always several workers who do not want to go with them. First, they argue with them, stroking them and tickling them, but finally, they take them up bodily and carry them out. Recognizing the fact that resistance is useless, the workers permit themselves to be borne away. Sometimes a few of the citizens stay in the old home, will not give it up or come back to it, and even carry the brood thither. With infinite patience, they are taken up again and borne to the new nest, until finally all are installed there. Removal of this kind may sometimes take several weeks to complete. Ants carry one another or their brood in ways as various among their species as among human beings. The Indians carry their young hanging on their backs, the Europeans in their arms. The Malays let them ride upon their shoulders. Sport is peaceful warfare and strengthens the body for the real game of war. No other creatures on earth have perfected war to so high a degree as man and ant. War is fundamental in ant nature as in human nature. Every little worker knows that. For this reason, they do whatever they can by way of preparation for both defense and attack, varying as the nests of the different species do. Each has developed some kind of protection against enemies. The ant nest is always a fortress. Special care is devoted to the construction of the entrances, and they are carefully guarded, usually by those specially chosen as guards. The carpenter ant Colobopsis has a special soldier type, notable for his very large head, which serves not only as a guard but as the door itself. The entry to the wooden nest of this eminent Shriner is just large enough for the soldier to close it with her big head, and you can hardly distinguish the head from the surrounding wood. If a worker wishes to enter the nest, she raps, tapping on the head door with her feelers. The living door recognizes the friend and admits her, only to resume her station again. In many species, when working hours are over, the entrances to the nest are tightly closed. If the fortress is attacked, the guards are the ones to offer the first resistance. Some of these undertake the defense while others hasten into the nest to spread the news. They do this by tapping their sisters with their feelers. This tapping may be considered ant language. Other species have a different method of spreading information. They beat on the wall of the nest with their head or body very hard. The vibration is heard throughout the nest and is taken as the alarm signal by the sisters within the nest. Others have a method of making a noise with a special organ on the hind body, which produces a shrill sound when rubbed. These ants thus give a vocal alarm. They shout. The action of the people thus attacked differs, as it does among men, not only as to species but also as to individuals. Weak people rush forth in a mob and seek safety in flight. But in this flight, the ants are far more nightly than human beings. Anyone who has seen the panic in a theater or upon a sinking ship knows how pitiable, how merciless, is the action of the stronger sex. With some exceptions, of course. Among the ants, however, the order of every brave ship's officer is obeyed implicitly. Women and children first. They save the mother queen. They save the brood. Save even the weak males if any are in the nest. The stronger sex in the ant's nest is the arrested female, which compares most favorably with the male of humanity. Populous states of fighting stock, even though sometimes weak, wage battle with the besiegers. The actions of the individual ants are very different. While some of the workers are very valorous and attack with berserk rage, some of their sisters, thick around them, are errant cowards. These run away or pretend to be dead, a favorite and very easy mode of defense with some beetles. Some play the wild man, acting as though possessed, to make the enemy afraid, as happens not infrequently. It may be said that God is on the side of the heaviest battalions, even among the ants, but sometimes a well-fortressed small body of warriors puts to fight a far larger number of attackers. If some are taken prisoner, their lot is not a happy one. They are promptly torn to bits. It seems as though the captured workers know this. They do not struggle, but invite their doom. The ants' weapons first of all are the mandibles of the upper jaw, then the poisonous sting. The ants that have no sting are provided with a poison gland, from which they inject the poison into the wounds they inflict upon the enemy with their mandibles. Usually, the battle is begun by the smaller ants, which seem to use better tactics than the larger typical soldiers. The latter must become enraged before they really take part in the battle, but then the result rests upon their efforts. The battles and the wars, too, which often last for months, arise from various causes. Frequently the contest is for a piece of land, which two peoples would like to annex, or the desire to take away land from the other. They steal the brood of the other people either to devour them or to enslave them. They steal their store of grain or their cattle, or they take possession of the city from which they have driven out the owners. After war comes peace, for the ants know how to conclude peace in many ways. Sometimes the enemy is annihilated, and all that he had is taken over. In other cases, neither side has gained a complete victory, and each withdraws to its own nest or territory. A strip of land between the two peoples is declared neutral territory, and no one from either side ever enters it. Sometimes it happens that a treaty of cooperation is entered into by former foes. In rare instances, where very weak peoples are concerned, an amalgamation takes place. A valorous people develop through sport and play, by ever-continuous labor and hard fighting, and hardened by many trials, must develop great vitality. The power of resistance and virility of ants surpasses that of all other creatures. We have seen the hardships that must be endured by the young queen for months at a time to rear her brood. One day spent in observing the industry of each worker ant will make us envious. But we are defeated too, when we try to ascertain the virility of the ant. Strangely, none of the scientific investigators of ant life has ever undertaken this investigation. It fell to the lot of a woman, an American investigator, to accomplish this purpose. She took ants, a queen, workers, and the young brood, froze them, and kept them for 24 hours in a temperature of 23 Fahrenheit. Thawed out then, all survived. Even the young brood developed normally thereafter. She starved ants. Young queens survived for 15 months without any food whatsoever and managed to rear their brood. She kept ants underwater for 8 days. When taken out, they revived. She cut off the head of one ant. It lived for 21 days and ran about until 2 days before its death. The astonishing power of resistance that ants manifest against poisons is no less remarkable. The preachers of morals of all times who have pointed out the ant to mankind as a shining ample of industry and energy have been only half right. There are loafers among ants, just as among men. We shall make the acquaintance of entire peoples who have succeeded in doing nothing at all, leaving all the work of the nest to other ants, their slaves. Even the most industrious ants, at least in northern lands, do nothing for months at a time. In the winter there is nothing to be gathered in the open. Hunting, cattle raising, and grain gathering stop. The animals remain quietly in their nest. They eat very little of their store and do only the most necessary tasks. They do not really sleep, but they drag themselves close together and doze away. They are quiescent like the forest and field and many animals. And only when the storms of spring sweep over the country do they awaken to new life. I have taken part in many meetings in halls, churches, or in the open air. In all parts of the world, all seem to insult us through sound and smell. These masses of men reek and shriek. Frequently our feelings are offended. Sometimes I have wondered why these human assemblies took place. Why did these masses gather here or there? I have tried too, taking great pains, to attain the soul state of the ant. As a poet may do perhaps better than a scientist, I think I may have succeeded, but I never have been able to grasp the real purpose of the great assemblages of the ant peoples. For they do assemble, out in the open, and in the artificial nest. All at once they gather around, then sit still and quiet for many hours at a time. They do not talk to one another. They do not touch one another with their feelers. They move the hinder body slightly, as a dog wags his tail. They wave their feelers hither and thither, very slowly. It is very striking when you stop to think of it, that no animal on earth works so continuously, with slight intervals for play, as the ant. What then are the workers about now? What is the purpose of these assemblies? Are they consulting about something important to the state? Are they praying, as men do in their churches? Are they thanking their Creator that He made them the crown of the insect world? Are they singing a silent Te Deum Laudamus at the recollection of their latest victory over some enemy people? Or are they observing a day of rest, a day of assemblage, a quiet, contemplative feast day after so much labor? Possibly it is none of these, possibly nothing that the human mind can grasp. Yet it may be that we shall be able to answer this puzzle someday, and I think that we shall know then that these assemblies of the quiet ants have a very much more important intellectual purpose than all the assemblies of man. Every human nation has its peculiar customs, usages, and modes of life, and so has every ant nation, disparate, peculiar, yet much that is common to all. We may be struck by the peculiar, yet we must comprehend what is common first of all. Man and all other living creatures possess the urge to keep the species alive and perpetuate it. This urge exists back of all modes of life.